A seagull desperately tries to get the attention of Coast Guard officers. And when they finally follow her, what they discover in the depths of the ocean leaves them speechless. It was a foggy morning in the small coastal town of Oceanview, where the salty breeze carried the familiar sounds of crashing waves and seagulls calling overhead. The harbor was bustling with activity as usual, fishermen preparing their nets, boats heading out to sea, and the local Coast Guard station maintaining its watchful presence over the Atlantic waters. Captain Jake Morrison and Officer Sarah Chen had been working together at the Oceanview Coast Guard station for 3 years. Their partnership had developed into a seamless operation, with Jake's 15 years of maritime experience complementing Sarah's sharp analytical skills and attention to detail. This morning started like any other, with routine harbor patrols and equipment checks. As Jake sipped his coffee outside the station, something caught his eye. A single seagull was behaving strangely, unlike the usual chaotic flight patterns of the coastal birds. This one was flying in a very specific direction, repeatedly. The bird would soar out toward the northeast, circle back to the harbor, land briefly on the station's roof, and then repeat the exact same flight path. "Sarah, come take a look at this," Jake called out, pointing toward the peculiar seagull. Sarah emerged from the station, following Jake's gaze to the bird that was now perched on a nearby piling, its bright yellow beak gleaming in the morning sun. "What about it?" Sarah asked, though she could immediately see that something was different about this bird's behavior. Most seagulls were either scavenging for food or flying in random patterns, but this one seemed to have a purpose. "Watch," Jake said, as the seagull suddenly took off again, following the exact same northeastern route it had taken before. "She's been doing this for the past 20 minutes. Same direction, same pattern, like she's trying to show us something." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You think a seagull is trying to communicate with us?" But even as she said it, she couldn't deny the bird's unusual behavior was intriguing. The seagull returned once more, this time landing closer to them and letting out a series of sharp, urgent calls. "I know it sounds crazy," Jake admitted, "but I've been on these waters long enough to know when something's not right. Animals have instincts we don't understand. Remember the dolphins that led us to that missing kayaker last year?" Sarah nodded slowly. That incident had made her more open to the possibility that marine life could sometimes sense things humans couldn't. "Okay, let's say you're right. What do you suggest we do?" The seagull, as if understanding their conversation, took off again with even more urgency, circling above their heads before heading northeast. This time, it didn't return immediately but hovered about 50 yards away, seemingly waiting. Follow her," Jake said decisively. "The patrol boat is ready, and we've got time before our next scheduled run. If nothing else, we'll get some fresh air and maybe prove I'm overthinking this." Sarah checked her watch and looked at the seagull, which was now calling more frantically. Something about the bird's persistence was compelling. "All right, but if we're chasing a seagull on a wild goose chase, you're buying lunch for the next week." Within minutes, they had their patrol boat ready and were heading out of the harbor. The seagull, which Sarah had started calling Leela after her grandmother who had the same piercing, determined eyes, flew ahead of them with unwavering purpose. The morning fog was starting to lift, revealing the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The water was relatively calm, with gentle swells that made for easy navigation. Lila maintained her northeastern course, occasionally circling back to ensure they were following. "This is either going to be the most ridiculous thing we've ever done, or something incredible," Sarah muttered, keeping her eyes on the bird while Jake maneuvered the boat through the increasingly choppy waters. As they traveled further from shore, the weather began to change. The fog was thickening again, and the wind was picking up, creating larger waves that rocked their boat more forcefully. Jake noticed the change in conditions and felt a familiar unease. "Weather's turning," he called out over the increasing wind. "We might need to head back soon." But Lila seemed undeterred by the deteriorating conditions, continuing her determined flight pattern ahead of them. Sarah consulted their GPS and radio equipment. "We're about 3 miles northeast of the harbor. If we're going to turn back, now would be the time." But something in her gut told her they needed to continue. Suddenly, Leela's behavior changed dramatically. Instead of flying in her usual straight line, she began circling frantically above a specific area of water, her calls becoming more urgent and distressed. The seagull dove toward the water repeatedly, as if trying to draw their attention to something below the surface. "There," Sarah pointed, toward the area where Leela was circling. "She's definitely trying to show us something." Jake immediately reduced their speed and began maneuvering the boat toward the spot. As they approached the area, the water seemed slightly different, darker, with an unusual pattern of currents that suggested something substantial was disrupting the normal flow. Jake's experienced eyes immediately recognized the signs. "Sarah, get the depth finder running," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "and prepare the emergency beacon. I think we might have found something." The depth finder began pinging, and what they saw on the screen made both officers freeze. There, about 40 feet below the surface, was the unmistakable outline of a vessel, and it was much larger than they had expected. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered, staring at the sonar reading. Jake, that's not a small boat. That's a ship. Jake's hands tightened on the wheel as he processed the information. We need to call this in immediately. This could be ... He paused, not wanting to voice what they were both thinking. In these waters, a sunken vessel of this size could mean multiple casualties. As Sarah reached for the radio, Lila's calls became even more frantic. The Seagull was now diving toward the water repeatedly, almost as if she was trying to tell them that time was running out. Coast Guard Station Oceanview. This is Unit 12, Sarah spoke into the radio. We have located what appears to be a vessel approximately 3 miles northeast of the harbor, requesting immediate backup and dive team support. The response came quickly. Unit 12. Confirm coordinates and vessel size. Emergency response team is being dispatched. Jake was already preparing their emergency diving equipment while keeping the boat positioned directly above the wreck. Sarah, I'm going down to take a preliminary look. Something's not right about this whole situation. Absolutely not, Sarah replied firmly. We wait for the dive team. Protocol exists for a reason. But even as she said it, she could see the conflict. In Jake's eyes, they both knew that if there were survivors down there, every minute could be crucial. Lila suddenly flew directly to their boat, landing on the bow and looking at them with what could only be described as pleading eyes. The Seagull let out a long mournful cry that seemed to echo across the water. She knows something we don't, Jake said quietly. Look at her, Sarah. That's not just random animal behavior. She's trying to tell us something urgent. Sarah looked at the Seagull, then at the sonar reading, then back at Jake. Every instinct told her to wait for backup, but something deeper, perhaps the same instinct that had guided Lila to them, was telling her they needed to act. 5 minutes, she said finally. Quick reconnaissance dive only. You go down. I maintain surface watch and radio contact with backup. Jake nodded and began suiting up in their emergency diving gear. It wasn't the most advanced equipment, but it would be sufficient for a quick assessment dive. As he prepared, Lila remained perched on the bow, her eyes never leaving the water. Radio check, Jake said, as he prepared to enter the water. If anything goes wrong, you pull me up immediately. Copy that, Sarah replied, her hands steady on the radio. Dive team ETA is 12 minutes. Make it quick. Jake slipped into the cold Atlantic water, and the world above suddenly seemed very far away. The visibility was limited, but as he descended toward the sonar-indicated position, shapes began to emerge from the murky depths. What he saw made his blood run cold. It wasn't just a sunken vessel, it was a fishing boat, and it was recent. The paint was still relatively fresh, and there were no signs of the marine growth that would indicate it had been underwater for an extended period. Sarah, Jake's voice crackled through the radio. This is a fresh wreck. Very recent. I'm seeing a fishing vessel, approximately 60 feet long. No obvious signs of survivors on deck, but I'm going to check the cabin area. Above the surface. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Leela had not moved from her position on the bow, but her calls had become softer, almost mournful, as if she understood the gravity of what was being discovered below. Jake carefully approached the cabin area of the sunken vessel. The door was partially open, and he could see into the dark interior. His heart pounded as he swam closer, his flashlight cutting through the murky water to reveal what lay inside. What he discovered made him gasp into his regulator. There, huddled in the far corner of the cabin, was a man alive. The survivor was wearing a life jacket and appeared to be unconscious but breathing. Jake's training kicked in immediately. Sarah, I've got a survivor. Jake's voice crackled urgently through the radio. Male, unconscious, appears to be hypothermic. I need immediate medical support down here. Above the surface, Sarah's hands flew over the radio controls. Coast Guard Station, this is Unit 12. We have confirmed survivor in the water. Need immediate emergency medical team and evacuation support. Repeat, we have a live rescue situation. Jake quickly assessed the situation. The survivor was trapped in an air pocket within the cabin, which had likely kept him alive. However, the man's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Without proper medical attention, he wouldn't survive much longer. I'm bringing him up. Jake radioed to Sarah. Prepare the emergency equipment. He's hypothermic and barely conscious. The rescue was challenging. Jake had to carefully maneuver the unconscious man out of the cabin and begin the ascent to the surface. The survivor was dead weight, and Jake's own air supply was running low. Every second counted. As they broke the surface, Sarah was ready with emergency blankets and the first aid kit. The survivor was pale. His lips blew from cold, but he was alive. Sarah immediately began warming procedures while radioing for a medical helicopter. He's alive, but barely, Sarah reported to Jake as they worked together to stabilize the man. Pulse is weak, breathing is shallow. He needs immediate hospital care. Lila, who had remained vigilant throughout the entire rescue, suddenly took off from the boat. But this time, instead of flying toward the ocean, she circled above them in what could only be described as a victory pattern, calling out in a way that sounded almost celebratory. As they waited for the medical helicopter to arrive, the survivor began to regain consciousness. His first words were barely audible. The storm came out of nowhere. Boat went down. I thought no one would find me. Jake looked at Sarah, then at Leela, who was now perched nearby, preening her feathers calmly. Someone did find you, Jake said softly. Actually, someone very special let us write to you. The man's eyes followed Jake's gaze to the Seagull. That bird. She was there when the boat went down. She stayed, circling above. Even when I went under, I thought I was hallucinating. Sarah felt chills run down her spine. She's been trying to lead us to you all morning. We almost didn't follow her. Thank God you did, the survivor whispered, tears mixing with the salt water on his cheeks. The medical helicopter arrived within minutes, and the survivor, who they later learned was named Marcus, a local fisherman who had been caught in an unexpected squall, was airlifted to the nearest hospital. The doctors later confirmed that he wouldn't have survived another hour in those conditions. As the helicopter disappeared into the distance, Jake and Sarah remained on the water, processing what had just happened. The official dive team arrived shortly after, and they were able to provide them with the exact coordinates and details of the wreck. I have never seen anything like it, the lead diver told them after completing his assessment. That air pocket in the cabin, it was like a miracle, and the fact that you found him when you did, he was minutes away from losing consciousness permanently. Sarah looked at Leela, who was now flying in lazy circles above their boats, seemingly satisfied with the day's work. It wasn't us who found him, she said quietly. It was her. In the days that followed, the story of Leela's guidance spread throughout the coastal community. Marcus made a full recovery and insisted on visiting the Coast Guard station too personally. Thanked Jake and Sarah. But what moved everyone most was when he asked to see the bird that saved my life. Lila appeared that day, as if summoned by some invisible force. She landed on the dock near Marcus, who knelt down and gently extended his hand. For a moment, bird and man seemed to communicate in a way that transcended words. She stayed with me, Marcus told the gathered crowd of locals and reporters. Even when I went under, she kept circling above. I knew as long as she was there, someone would eventually come. The local newspaper ran the story under the headline, Seagull Hero, Guides Coast Guard to Miracle Rescue. But for Jake and Sarah, the real story was about trust. Trusting instincts, trusting each other, and trusting that sometimes guidance comes from the most unexpected sources. A month later, Jake and Sarah were back on patrol when they spotted a familiar bird flying in purposeful patterns near the harbor. This time, Leela was leading them to a small recreational boat that had engine trouble and was drifting toward dangerous rocks. Here we go again, Sarah laughed, but she was already turning the boat to follow their feathered guide. I'm starting to think we should put her on the payroll, Jake joked. But his respect for the Seagull's instincts was absolute. As they followed Leela to another successful rescue, Sarah couldn't help but wonder about the mysterious connection between humans and animals. Some bonds, she realized, transcend explanation and exist in a realm where logic gives way to something deeper, intuition, instinct, and perhaps even a touch of magic. The coastal community of Oceanview had always been shaped by the sea, but now it was also shaped by the story of a seagull, who proved that heroes come in all forms. Leela continued to patrol the waters, her watchful eyes always scanning for those in need, and Jake and Sarah continued to follow her guidance, knowing that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from the most unlikely sources. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of animal heroism and human courage. Click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories that remind us of the extraordinary connections that exist in our world. Leave a comment below if you've ever experienced an unexplained connection with an animal. Your story might inspire others who believe in the magic of these special bonds. Until next time, keep watching for the heroes among us, no matter how small or unexpected they might be.